This is Sawyer Robertson, and you're listening to the Bearcast on SicEm365.com.
Welcome into the Bearcast on SicEm365.com. I'm your host, Grayson Grundhoefer. Today, I'm here with Colt Barber. Colt, we are going to go through the Big 12 win totals that were released by Circa America. Lots of interesting notes here. So we're kind of going to dive through each of the tiers and kind of how these teams are looking at this point in the season. I think, just kind of reading the national kind of perception and seeing what people have talked about, I think it kind of aligns with where these win totals have ended up a little bit. There are some teams that are getting a lot of hype and some teams that are kind of sneaking under the radar a little bit that could be a lot better. But overall, it's going to be a really interesting year. And right now, everyone kind of expects more of the same from the Big 12, a lot of parity.
Yeah. I mean, I think that truthfully is not as much about parity as it is we just don't know. I think so often, like in other conferences and even previously in the Big 12, you said there's this talent discrepancy between top of the league and the bottom of the league. Well, there's not that this year. And we can talk about transfer portal ads and all this stuff, but there's not a major difference between the top and the bottom of this league. And I don't know if there is a true bottom, but there's also at this juncture, I mean, Arizona State made the best case for the highest top as you could with what they did, obviously making the college football playoff. But at the end of the day, you have an automatic qualifier into the playoff. That top really doesn't mean a ton because someone's always going to get in. So I don't see Arizona State as anyone that separated themselves in terms of overall talent to make a difference between the top and the bottom of the league. And as we saw, even with a team like Kansas last year, all the talent coming back in the world, and they go 5-7. And they played well at times. But I think, as you mentioned, this is the outlook of the Big 12. And until someone really elevates in recruiting rankings, transfer portal rankings that really settle in on a 3 to 4 year window, this is what we should expect in the Big 12.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And obviously, one of the teams that we're going to talk about here in this first group, Texas Tech, is kind of the ones that are trying to make the biggest case for talent acquisition and the kind of group that they've brought in and how that maybe will end up showing up on the football field. So let's start with that. The top three teams right now, there are three teams projected 8.5 wins. It's Arizona State, Kansas State, and Texas Tech. Those are the three favorites at the moment. I think a lot of this is schedule based, especially in Texas Tech's case, a really weak non-conference that features 3 home games and they don't play a single Power 4 team. Pretty ridiculous, pretty terrible schedule. Now they do have Oregon State, which at one point they were in the Pac-12. So I guess you give them a slight pass, but it's a bad look for the Big 12 when one of the teams who's kind of gotten the most attention this offseason just simply does not play anyone in the non-conference. And then, of course, Arizona State winning the Big 12 last year, lots of momentum there. And K-State's kind of an established fixture, and they got Avery Johnson, Chris Kleiman, a great coach. What do you think about that, the top three there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Tech non-conference schedule, I mean, it's unfortunate for perception, but like let's not act like Oregon State was this world beater. But when they were in the Pac-12, it was a Pac-12 team, and it is what it is. They're unfortunate they moved and that conference reshuffled. But at the same time, Baylor, for instance, had Utah. Unfortunately, Utah landed in the Big 12 and had a spot to land. But then SMU went from a non-power opponent to now a power opponent. And obviously they made the CFP last year. So it's an interesting dynamic with all these reshuffling of conferences, how these non-conference schedules land out. Oregon State, obviously not very good. They're not going to be the decline between the Power 4 and those other leagues is massive now. The more and more the deeper we get into this. But I mean, if you look at Arizona State, won 11 games last year, Big 12 champs, went to the CFP, probably should have beat Texas in the CFP based on the way that game went at the end. They had a great chance to, if nonetheless. So I think my biggest question mark with them is how do you replace Cam Scatterbo and what he brought to that offense? And they have a lot returning, but he did so much for them. And that CFP game was a great example of how he just took that game over. Texas had no answer for him. How do they come back? And he was a guy, the one consistent, as good as Sam Levitt was throughout the year. Scatterbo was the guy that made the difference from game to game. And interestingly enough, we're talking about a team in Arizona State and a team in Texas Tech. They're in this top three that Texas Tech beat last year. And I don't know if you that game probably doesn't play out the same way at the end of the year, but Tech did win that game, and that was really before Scadaboo's real emergence. So I like Arizona State just fine, but I think at the end of the day, it really does come down to schedule, because they're not going to outclass anybody because of their talent. That's what you have in the Big 12. So you better show up every single week ready to play. Arizona has to do that if they want to replicate what they did last year.
Yeah, and Arizona State now has to go from the hunter to the hunted. I mean, they were not supposed to be good at all last year, and they just, exceeded expectations tremendously, and now they're in a different spot this season. Now, I just have an issue with all of these schedules. I mean, Kansas State plays Arizona in the non-conference, and then North Dakota and Army, and then Arizona State plays Northern Arizona at Mississippi State and Texas State, which, Texas State's fine, but Mississippi State's the worst team in the SEC. Just really disappointing to see these three teams that everyone's predicting to be really good, or, who everyone's projecting these win totals for, not really being able to challenge themselves outside of the conference. It just is not a good look, like I said earlier, and it doesn't help conference perception when you're not playing teams that are actually, really good from these big power leagues like the Big Ten or the SEC.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, truthfully, for when you look at Arizona State and with Arizona in the non-conference, right? No, Kansas State, excuse me. Yeah. Kansas State, Arizona in the non-conference. That's just, I mean, Arizona probably when they scheduled that game looked pretty good, and I would assume so. Now they're a conference opponent, not very good, and it doesn't really improve your perception of the league, whoever wins that game. It's kind of like the Cotton Bowl last year, right? When you have Colorado and BYU playing in the Cotton Bowl. No one benefited from that game being played except those two teams, and just because they had an extra win at the end of the day. But yeah, I'm with you. Like the non-conference, Baylor has done a great job. And it used to be the biggest gripe about Baylor was, how do you improve your non? Well, Baylor's done that. Now, I mean, and truthfully, they kind of got in the middle of that with BYU and Utah. They were non-league opponents. Now they're league opponents, and it affected that. But now if you look up, they have Auburn the next few years, and they have Oregon the next few years. They've done what they could to improve that outlook of now Auburn's not been great, but perceptually it's much different than Mississippi State, Oregon State. I'm it's hard for me to say I'm disappointed in Tech and disappointed in Kansas State specifically, but it is what it is at this point. They have to win, but we're not going to know anything more about these teams as they come into Big 12 play as we would have if they had not played these games and they played another FCS type school.
Right. Okay. Let's move over to the cluster, this 7.5 win total group. This is just a loaded group. Baylor, BYU, Iowa State, Kansas, Utah, TCU. Lots of teams that were kind of hovering right around this number last year. And then, of course, kind of the I guess you'd say surprise one, Utah, which, they did not have a great year last year. Their defense was good, but the rest of the team was not. The other teams feel pretty appropriately placed. I know Kansas won 5 games last year, but they were a completely different team at the end of the year than they were at the beginning. It's going to be a very interesting group. A lot of these teams are going to fall under this number, but I do think a few of these teams will also finish, much higher and potentially win the Big 12. I think there's some real contenders in this group.
Yeah, there is. And you look at that, Baylor, BYU, Iowa State, Kansas, and TCU all return starting quarterbacks. Utah does not, with Cam Rising finally moving on, but they bring in a transfer that knows the system that he's going to be playing in from New Mexico. And I think this is just a group of, I don't really know what's going to happen, but at the same time, I think it trends more up than down for the majority of these teams. I think that you can make a case for all these teams. Iowa State specifically, if they can just get a little better than they were defensively at the end of the year, which was really surprising, they could be a lot better this year. BYU, maybe they peaked last year. I don't know if we really know what or who they are going into this year, what they lost. I think they were very fortunate in their season last year to get where they were, and I'm interested to see how that team starts this year. Kansas returning Jalen Daniels, TCU, Josh Hoover at quarterback. Like, those are all teams that could emerge. If they catch some breaks, they might be in that 10-win range at the end of the year, and they're the ones that surpass. My favorite, for obvious reasons or biased reasons, is Baylor. Like, they just returned so much, and we know a lot of the situation going on with Ashton Hawkins. But outside of that, offense is loaded. Defense has a lot of new faces, but you feel better in year 2 under Dave Aranda as the defensive coordinator. But in general, that entire group, like, it's kind of a toss-up. If any of those games are played tomorrow, I don't know. It'd be really difficult to pick any of those between those teams.
I definitely love a few of these teams a lot more as far as who I would take to cover this, 7.5 wins, specifically Baylor and TCU. I think both those teams are actual contenders this upcoming season. I think Iowa State might be, but they lost a lot, especially at the playmaker, positions with 2 second-round picks at wide receiver. That's a lot to make up for. But Baylor and TCU are really intriguing to me at the 7.5 win number. I would definitely take the over there for them. Now, looking at some of these other teams, I mean, Kansas and Utah, I don't know how good they're going to be. I think I would kind of lean towards the under on those 2 teams. And then I think Iowa State's kind of the one that I just don't know. They're kind of right there on the fringe for me in that cluster of teams. But yeah, Baylor in this 7.5 win number, I think they're going to win more than that at this point in the year. I think they're for sure going to win 8 games at least. And I think they're probably going to overachieve as well. Their problem is they have a really tough non-conference. I think people are baking in at least 1 or 2 losses there.
Yeah, BYU, Stanford, a non-conference game. I was just looking at Utah's schedule. UCLA is kind of a sneaky tough game. I don't really know what they're going to have other than it's on the road. Not great, but it is now a Big Ten team. Same kind of theme. There's not a ton of teams with a big, tough non-conference that we're going to know a ton until they get deeper into the Big 12 play. And then at that point, you're really going to battle this perception issue. And we can talk more about this later, but who is who by the time this get Baylor? If Baylor wins their 2 games, you have a pretty good idea of who they are, especially SMU, Auburn team that are expected to be top 15 teams preseason. We've talked about that before. But outside of that, this entire group doesn't really have the opportunity to separate themselves. TCU will have, SMU in non-conference, UNC in non-conference. So decently tough, really interesting storyline there with Bill Belichick at UNC. But who knows how those, mutual opponents, Baylor and TCU have a mutual opponent. But I don't know that we know going in after non-conference what these teams really are for the most part. Because even like a team like UNC, like decent name, but we don't really know. Auburn, decent name, but we don't really know. How long does it take those teams to really get off its programs? And it's going to really, to me, come down to week 14 around that at the end of the schedule to really know what these teams actually are. Kind of like we did last year with Baylor, obviously with Kansas, we figured out who they were. TCU, kind of good offense, whatever. We don't really know the identities. We're going to know more and more the deeper we get into because early season games aren't going to really tell us much.
Absolutely. All right, let's dive into this next group. We got 2 more sections left. This group is kind of the bowl teams, right? They're the projected teams to make the bowl, make a bowl game. And that's Houston at 6.5 wins, which is kind of an eye-popping number after what they did a year ago. Cincinnati, 6 wins, and then Colorado, 6 wins. So kind of a downturn for Colorado here after losing a lot of talent. But the one that stands out to me the most here is Houston. I mean, 6.5 wins. That's pretty squarely a bowl team and a team that's going to be, really competitive this year. I don't know if I'm buying that at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that you put in perspective, Baylor was a 5.5 win over and under before last season, go on to win 8. Houston went 4-8 last year versus Baylor's 3-9 the previous year in 2023. So similar jumps, actually. Baylor maybe a little bit more than what they made than what Houston's projected. But look at their schedule: SFA, Rice, and Oregon State at Oregon State non-conference. I mean, we just talked about it for Texas Tech standpoint. Oregon State, you would hope that Houston can win that game for league perceptions, but then they play versus Colorado, versus Texas Tech, at Oklahoma State, versus Arizona, at Arizona State, versus West Virginia, at UCF, versus TCU, at Baylor. I mean, I don't know. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 home games to win 6.5. That means you're going undefeated at home to surpass that win total and winning 1 on the road. I mean, a game at Rice is not difficult. You should win that. If not, you're in a world of hurt. But it's a tough call to make. I mean, UCF's going to be in transition year. Oklahoma State I would expect them historically to rebound this year after what they did last year, and that's a game on the road. At Arizona State, probably a loss at this point. I don't see how they're going to go in and win that game unless Arizona State just completely falls off their horse. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't know where you get to 6.5 or get to 7 essentially if you think they're going to go over. I would pick under at this point, but I don't know that we saw how good Houston's defense was last year. So personnel wise, where are they with a new defensive coordinator? We don't know at this point.
Well, and they lost their two best defensive players to the transfer portal. And so it's like, I just, there's no way that I can expect them to win 7 games next year. I can't. And so I think that that's an area where I think that I'm having an issue with kind of that number for them. Colorado kind of in transition a little bit. They got to figure out their quarterback position, but I think Caden Salter can get them to 6 wins. I feel pretty confident in that. And then Cincinnati got a really good quarterback, but I think they're probably going to win 6 games. Like that's probably kind of where I'm going to have them. So that feels about right. All right, let's dive into this last group really quick. Arizona's at 5.5 wins, UCF 5.5 wins, Oklahoma State 5 wins, and then West Virginia 5 wins. Very interesting group here. And to me, I see 2 teams that are probably going to bottom out from this group, and specifically Arizona and UCF. And then I see 2 teams that are kind of being slept on a little bit when I look at Oklahoma State and West Virginia potentially being better than this number, especially with just 5 wins. I mean, that's pretty safe in my eyes with both of those teams, especially Oklahoma State. I think they're the ones that are kind of most due for a rebound.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of trust Mike Gunn to get going, but at some point, that maybe that kind of runs out for him. Is it this year? I don't know. Like I looking at their schedule, I mean, they play at Oregon in non-conference, so basically a loss there. Tulsa, but man, like you trust Mike Gundy to a great extent, and I think West Virginia. I don't know with Rich Rod. Like, can he get it that quick? I don't know. I pull up their schedule and look, but like anytime, any year one coaches are very difficult to gauge. A guy like that, like, he has his system, but how does it translate now? Like when he was at his peak, he was kind of doing things that no one else was doing with dual threat quarterbacks, et cetera, with Pat White, but he's continued to do that to the lower levels. He wasn't able to work it at Michigan, but then he's kind of come back up through the ranks. So I think he's a great fit for West Virginia. Can he do it in year one? After last year was kind of, 6-7, disappointing year based on what their expectations were. I'm with you. I think Oklahoma State's that one that I trust the most. West Virginia is a little bit there for me. I just don't know in year one of a coach that what he's able to do. And honestly, like, is it Jaheim White, their running back, is very impressive. And I think you have to hang your hat on him, especially after the running back left for Ohio State. But I like them. I like them fine. I think they're always going to have talent. It's just how quickly can that implement it into his system.
Definitely. And that UCF team is the team that I'm looking at. And I'm definitely taking the under there. They have North Carolina in the non-conference, but the games that I'm just looking at, I mean, at Kansas State, at Baylor, at Texas Tech, and at BYU. I mean, that's basically 4 guaranteed losses in my eyes, at least at this point in the season. And so when you look at that mixed with a couple tough games, I just think it's going to be very much a rebuilding year for them with Scott Frost. I just think it's going to take some time for them to kind of figure it out and figure out their position and who they want to be after losing Gus Malzahn. It's a very interesting bottom of the group. I think you could see, 1 or 2 of these teams sneak up. Oklahoma State would probably be my best bet there. But of all these teams and all these bets, do you have one that you feel the best about reaching an over, and then one you feel the best about reaching the under?
Man, it's so tough because you're looking at such a small window for all of these teams. I mean, 7.5 to 8.5 with the upper echelon 6. I mean, nobody's really ahead of the pack. And obviously you have your 3 lower, but I mean, I don't want to say Baylor just because, but I like that. And especially if they can get a win in non-conference. And 7.5, how many times has Baylor won 8 or more games? It's been pretty frequent. I mean, they've had their ups and downs, but they've done it pretty consistently. 8 wins isn't unattainable. It's not like they're not like they're shooting for another 12-win season. And you throw in a team like Tech that historically doesn't win more than 8 games. I mean, they do it every once in a while. They just don't do it very consistently. Those are 2 teams I'm looking at that they're kind of in that same window of range. But what have they done historically as a program? Baylor's had their really high highs and really low lows. I like Baylor at 7.5 or more, especially if they can get a non-conference win. 8.5 wins for Tech is that's based on schedule and some of their road games that they play. And looking at that specifically before we got on here, I was really surprised at how many tough road games that they will have against teams that are in the upper echelon. And then they don't play Baylor, which is, in my opinion, fortunate for them because Baylor has seemed to figure out what they want to do offensively that can attack a defense like Tech in year one of a defensive system.
Right. Yeah, I think Baylor's a pretty good bet. I like that 7.5 group. I think TCU is also kind of top of mind for me. I think they're going to be pretty good, especially with that lower number. And I just mentioned it. I mean, UCF, take the under. Yeah. I do not like that number. They're not going to a bowl game, and they would have to go to a bowl game in order to reach this number. But it's fun to talk about. I mean, we get to go through these Big 12, win totals. We're going to go through a bunch of these different kind of, releases that come out kind of projecting the season and get to talk about them. But it's nice to kind of see kind of where the media, where the national audience kind of thinks this conference is going to play out. And once again, parity. And that's been the kind of, I think, formula in the Big 12, and it kind of needs to change a little bit. You'd like to see some teams separate, but that just hasn't been the case for the past couple of years now.
Yeah, I think if a program like Baylor, TCU can really stabilize at the top of the conference, obviously from Baylor's standpoint, from our standpoint, you want it to be Baylor. But if you can have one that's just consistently there, Arizona State could potentially be that if they can continue that high of their season last year. But the Big 12 needs names. Utah, you thought would be that, then they just plunged last year. But someone, 1 or 2, 3 teams need to consistently be there. You would love for it to be Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State, like everyone thought it would be. They just have to do it. And I think that there's that potential. But I go back to the talent parity. Where is the talent in the league? It's so spread throughout. Not one team separates itself like we saw in previous years. So, I'm anxious to see how this year plays out. And I don't know if we necessarily know about all of these teams at this juncture, even if you had a great transfer portal haul.
Definitely. It'll be a very entertaining offseason as we get to talk about more of this. But Colt and I will be back later this week to talk a little bit more football, probably a little bit more Baylor focused in the next episode as well. But thanks everyone for listening. This has been the Bearcast on SicEm365.com.
Join Sikkim 365 Premium on a $1 for 1 month trial to read our experts' notes and insights. Know about high school commits, off-season transfers, coaching staff changes, and so much more before the rest. Also, download the Sikkim 365 app on your iPhone today to get instant notifications of breaking news, read up on the latest inside info, easily interact with other Baylor fans on our forums, and get alerts for anything published by your favorite staff members.